Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on our program this week, as Syria's economy collapses, the US launches crushing new sanctions. Also in the firing line, the conflict-ridden country's civilians. Afghan Lives Matter. We'll be speaking to Fawzia Koofi, a lawmaker in Kabul, about the plight of the Afghan community in Iran. They're sometimes referred to as the country's unwelcome guests. Also coming up on Middle East Matters this week, COVID-19 rattles the ancient city of Petra, with the tourism industry brought to a dramatic halt. Thank you for tuning in. We'll start with Syria this week, a country ravaged by nearly a decade of conflict, government corruption and an economic meltdown. According to the UN today, an estimated 83% of Syrians are living beneath the poverty line, and they're now bracing themselves for the toughest US sanctions yet.
Rare street protest in Syria, but it's not aimed at the government, it's anger over the economy. Demonstrators are complaining about rising food prices and the plummeting Syrian pound. Nine years of civil war has crippled the Syrian economy, but the currency's collapse is due in part to new U.S. sanctions. The Caesar Law signed by Donald Trump last year takes the code name of a former member of the Syrian military police who leaked thousands of photos of atrocities committed by the regime. In addition to freezing aid for reconstruction, the measure effectively prevents anyone around the world from doing business with Syrian officials or government institutions. But Syrian citizens say they're the ones paying the price.
قانون قيصر بنظر يعني ما ضر الحكومة ضر الشعب يعني لك الشعب الحركة خالص وقفت يعني خنق اقتصادي على الأخير.
President Bashar al-Assad has already fired his prime minister over the unrest, but it will take more than that to restore the country's finances. The growing crisis in neighboring Lebanon, which has long served as an economic gateway to the world for Syria, is further compounding the problem. Lebanon, too, is experiencing record currency depreciation and ongoing demonstrations.
Now, as anti-racist protests continue to spread across the globe this week on Middle East Matters, we want to draw attention to the plight of the Afghan community in Iran. According to the UN Refugee Agency, there are currently around 2.5 million Afghans residing in the Islamic Republic. That's in addition to 1 million migrants and refugees who have fled 4 decades of conflict. But these numbers have been dwindling. Just over 200,000 Afghans returned from Iran this year alone. Some of them were forced deportees. Critics say the presence of the Afghan community in the country has frequently been used as political leverage by authorities. On top of this, there have been recent cases of violence against Afghan refugees involving police. Now, for more, I'd like to welcome Fawzia Koofi to the program. She's the first woman deputy speaker of parliament in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being with us. Has there been this palpable increase in the number of forced deportees from Iran, as well as this spike in violence that, of course, we've been hearing about?
Well, over the past few months, we have had evidences on the increased cases of violence, and to some extent, sometimes horrible cases of violence against Afghan refugees and those who have traveled there for labor work in Iran. We did not see a forced deportation, but we saw a lot of Afghans coming back from Iran because of the fact that initially Iran was affected by COVID-19. However, the increase in the number of violence and more severe violence is something that we are worried about.
You are concerned about this, of course, and how do you perceive this situation? Because the Afghans are subjected to this violence. Do you, as a lawmaker in Afghanistan, do you see this as a political move on behalf of Iran? Or do you think, as Iran is explaining, it's actually finding this a real challenge because it is a country that doesn't receive much international support to handle this crisis?
I guess both. It's a combination of both. First of all, people of Afghanistan do appreciate our neighboring countries being the host for both Pakistan and Iran being the host for millions of refugees. But in the meantime, we understand that unfortunately the issue of refugee and especially the war refugees has always been politically used as a matter of pressure. But to be a victim of such violence inside the Iranian territories, I think it's an indication that Iran needs to take some measures to improve human rights within their own territories.
Ms. Kufi, you just mentioned human rights, and I do want to turn our attention to those that remain in Iran. Can you talk us through the different challenges that they face? One of them, of course, being that there are limited avenues for Afghans to claim refugee or immigration status in the Islamic Republic.
I guess the problem, one of the main challenge has been that Iran has not been open to these human rights and UN refugee organizations, for instance, UNHCR or other human rights organizations. So there has been a constant complaint, not only about the refugee status in Iran, but also in Pakistan, because when you get a refugee status in many countries, they give you a status, you find a status. But with the Islamic Republic of Iran, Afghan refugees do not have that status. So they always are deprived of the access to education and a legal status. And I think that puts them in sometimes in extremely difficult situation.
And something else that you alluded to earlier is that, and this is of great concern, is that those who do manage to find work in Iran only have access to a really limited number of dangerous and very poorly paid manual labor jobs despite their education or experience.
Yeah, many of these refugees that go to Iran and even Pakistan from Afghanistan are the motive is labor. Because of the war that unfortunately affected our economy for the past 4 decades, a lot of people go. And it has been a two-way kind of benefit. Yes, our refugee gets paid and they do a lot of work, but they also contribute to the economy of Iran. So I think they have to be appreciated, because I know that in many big factories, the major labor actually lies with Afghans. So I think they have to be appreciated. Their work situation should be given a status, a legal status. This is something that they do not have.
Absolutely, and it needs to be the case. And I want to end with the case of Afghan children very briefly, if you can. Of course, over the years, there have been preconditions for getting registered at schools in Iran, which many Afghan children can't actually fulfill. Isn't that right?
Yes, I mentioned earlier, and I would like to stress that I think because the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Organization or International Office for Migration, IOM, or other organizations, probably they do not work to the extent that they work with refugees in other countries. So therefore, I think for Afghan children especially, it becomes difficult. I luckily did not have the experience of being a refugee for war or economy in other countries, but I know a lot of children and people, we get reports who are deprived of being legally registered and going to school, which has a certificate and graduation, and as I said repeatedly, a legal status after graduation. So this is something, I think, given that we are a huge community in Iran, I think the government should give a specific attention to this.
So a greater call for international support and, of course, for the Iranians to improve the situation. Fawzia Koofi, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to speak to us here on Middle East Matters. Turning our attention to Israel and a promise from Benjamin Netanyahu, which has been approved by lawmakers. The country is now making preparations for a new settlement in the Golan Heights, named after Donald Trump. The move has drawn international condemnation.
Trump Heights, or Ramat Trump in Hebrew, a birthday present of sorts. For on Donald Trump's 74th birthday, the Israeli government renamed a Golan Heights town and put down 8 million shekels, or 2 million euros, to begin constructing a new settlement there.
נתחיל היום צעדים מעשיים להעלות את היישוב רמת טראמפ ברמת הגולן, שעל הריבונות שלה בידי ישראל הכיר הנשיא טראמפ.
This settlement is situated on land that was seized by the Israeli army in 1967 from Syria. For decades, the U.S. joined with the international community in saying it was illegal. Trump's reversal, all part of his peace plan, have further emboldened Benjamin Netanyahu's annexation projects, including claiming parts of the West Bank and the Jordan Valley starting July 1st. On June 6th, protesters, both Israelis and Palestinians, denounced the annexations, saying they would destroy any lingering hope for a Palestinian state.
Ça, c'est beaucoup plus grave et beaucoup plus dangereux que la corona. L'annexion, c'est-à-dire la guerre perpétuelle.
The international community has also expressed their concern. In Jordan last week, the foreign minister of Germany said finding common ground has become increasingly difficult.
Ich bin heute hier, um mit allen Seiten zu reden, das habe ich getan und das werde ich auch fortsetzen und mich beteiligen an der Suche nach einem Weg.
With the peace process at a standstill, Palestinians and their leaders have been pleading with European governments to do what they can to push back against the annexations, which they and protesters say will lead to apartheid and further unrest in the region.
Now to one of the 7 wonders of the world, the ancient city of Petra. However, the site, which welcomed 1 million foreign visitors last year, is now deserted. It's become yet another victim of the collapse of the tourism sector amid the global coronavirus pandemic.
Baking in the desert sun, the ancient city of Petra sits silent. It's what should have been Jordan's tourist season, but the only people left now are the security guards. The famous temple was carved out of the rock 2,000 years ago. It usually sees over 1 million people visit every year, with peak tourist season kicking off in February. However, the last few visitors left on March 16th, the day before Jordan closed its airports and borders. It left around 200 tour guides and 1,500 owners of the horses and donkeys used to transport tourists out of work, a situation shared by staff at nearby hotels, which have become ghost towns as empty as Petra.
أوقف النشاط السياحي، أوقفت الطيران المدني والجميع أنواع التواصل والتواصل عن طريق السيارات وغيره والقطارات، وأوقفت كل التواصل الاجتماعي بين الدول، مما أدى إلى ركود في السياحة وركود في الفنادق والقطاعات السياحية والمكاتب السياحية.
Tourism throughout the kingdom employs 100,000 people nationwide. It is worth 14% of its GDP, a revenue stream that has now become as dry as the Jordanian desert itself.
Well, that's it for me and the team this week. Thank you so much for watching Middle East Matters.